Alexander Litvinenko was a career KGB officer and became increasingly outspokenly critical about the many things in Russia, particularly about the course of the Chechen War, and eventually found himself faced with a choice to flee Russia with the advent of the Putin regime, or to remain and risk being branded a traitor. So Litvinenko found himself in exile in London, thinking himself to be immune or having escaped successfully from the long reaches of Putin's killers. He turned out to be mistaken in that. It's not really clear why they chose Litvinenko particularly. He's a sort of mid-level guy. Why would they do that? Basically to send a message to everyone who dares to defy or betray the regime.
Anna Politkovskaya was this extraordinary crusading journalist fighting for what she would regard as the truth.
She was completely fearless and unafraid to speak truth to power, even during the 1990s. That was already becoming somewhat politically incorrect. Obviously, when Putin came to power, it became actually physically dangerous. Her mistake was not to speak out about Putin. The problem with Anna Politkovskaya was that she criticized directly Ramzan Kadyrov, who was Putin's Chechen lieutenant on the ground and was guilty of absolutely horrific crimes against humanity.
I was singing the role of Anna Politkovskaya. She was a political activist and she didn't appear to be frightened. It made no sense to take the risks that she took. She was compelled to tell the truth, and I think that was really terrifying for Putin. She would not stop telling the truth.
Russia is ruled not by laws, but by понятия, which is understandings. There's a law, which is in large parts, fiction. And then there was a whole network of understandings, of понятия. What is acceptable? What are the limits of protest? And the people who got into trouble were the ones that sort of made a miscalculation. Anna Politkovskaya, she had many powerful friends, both inside and outside the government, people left over from the Yeltsin regime who sympathized with her position and thought she was brave. And she believed that she was treading a line.
The opera can't escape being political because it tells a story of one person being assassinated by a government machine. And it tells all sorts of, it hints at all different aspects and tells and shows aspects of the war with Chechnya and all the different political and historical situations are there, but all the time it's the effect of the politics on the individuals and their emotions and on their suffering and on their love that and that's what music deals with best, because that, in the end, if you want a really rigorous intellectual argument, opera isn't necessarily the right form. What opera can do is connect you with the emotional reality.
Ultimately, opera tells a story that words are insufficient to tell. That's my feeling. And not everybody but why do you sing it? You sing it because saying it is not enough. You get something different in pairing words with music that you can't find in any other way. You can't feel those feelings unless you have the music plus the words. You put those two together and you are transported.
Opera deals with dramatic questions of life and death. Alexander Litvinenko's life story is full of that, and especially the end of it was a very public moment. We could talk about his life ending on the public stage, the UK media, the time that he spent in UCL hospital when he was being treated for poisoning by polonium-210. Looking back, it seems like such right material for operatic treatment.
Most of these political operas by whatever Nixon in China, etc., they're formalist and postmodern-ish, and even though they are very clearly political, they're often rather convoluted, frankly, in the way that they communicate their political message. Whereas this Litvinenko opera occupies quite an unusual position in that lineage of Western political operas. It's impressive how many seemingly contradictory formats it manages to quite convincingly and fairly seamlessly contain within itself. It has the political naivete of socialist realism, but the stylistic eclecticism of postmodernism.
Put your hands in the air!
The Moscow theatre siege struck me as a really potent scene, offering great opportunities for theatre and for opera. You're in a theatre, and all the Chechen terrorists came into the auditorium and held the audience effectively at gunpoint. So it was quite the initial moment when they come in is pretty terrifying. There's a moment where the audience really literally would think, oh my God, what's happening?
The moment itself was a gift. It was dramatically a gift, and the music was fantastic. It's very, very well written for a mezzo-soprano. So all the extremities, it was wonderful. And I felt properly terrified. I had people pointing guns in my face. I felt the real fear of that, and it had happened. And I had, as I say, I had the text that Anna had written about what that really was like. So I had masses of layers of resource to play with.
There are so many different levels of truth. You have the facts as we understand them. We have the interpretation of the facts, which to an extent are always ambiguous. And a truthful performance is one that gives full range to the ambiguity of the situation. And so it's actually having a feeling of somebody struggling. We feel their emotion. We believe their integrity and their involvement. And that's what we would call theatrical truth. But it's not the same as literal truth. Anna's scene with Marina, which is one of her central scenes in the middle of the second act, never actually happened. The scene happened between Anna and Sasha, but in order to have this combination of mezzo-soprano and soprano in duet, it seemed right to sort of transfer that.
As a singer rather than director, I'm kind of in the moment truth. I don't really concern myself with an arc of truth. I've sung roles based on true characters before, but not in the same way living. So that felt, truthfully exciting. There was an adrenaline.
I think what's interesting is that there is an attempt to tell quite a factual story to inform an audience that maybe isn't aware of the day-to-day of Russian politics, which is the case for most people, to give a sense of the facts.
And maybe it's easier to talk about realism than it is to talk about truth. Realism and truth are connected concepts. Realism in the Soviet sense was not about portraying reality as it appears to the naked eye, but in a sense of a future or a present improved reality. It's clear what the Litvinenko opera condemns, the type of reality that it correctly condemns, a brutal authoritarian rule in Russia, but it's not clear what kind of reality is being promoted. My personal belief is that an element of manipulation is necessary in the context of artistic production, that artists will always fabricate and distort, and they probably necessarily need to. But we lack a kind of ideological structure for making sense of and for being able to kind of mutually comprehend and critique those kinds of fabrications.
The media was so fundamental to the piece. I decided to base it on a very filmic presentation and to use lots of video footage and also documentary footage, which gave the piece a sense of reality. Anna's scene with Marina was a case in point where we had Anna describing the experience of an old Chechen grandmother who was being tortured by the Russians. It seemed important to me that we should somehow actually see the grandmother's suffering and her torture. We had a singer playing the part of the grandmother and some soldiers, and they were half glimpsed between a couple of screens. But the audience saw, because we filmed it from a different angle, saw on one of the screens, a full-size version of her torture.
Electrodes, all that stuff, they turn the current on. She screamed silently, held it all inside. She told me if she said a thing, she feared she'd anger them still more. As she convulsed, the bully swore, "You're not dancing, 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 dancing."
The tempo of that scene was incredibly slow, but I think what it gave was this very kind of suspended feeling. It was Marina and Anna. We were just the two of us in a very poised and controlled and ordered setting, discussing something that was the opposite of poised. I mean, just real atrocity, human atrocity, political atrocity, like every layer, awful. I chose not to watch that even in the rehearsal. Like, I knew what was going to be happening and I knew what I was describing, but I felt it would be, I think I would have, as Olivia, got lost in what I'd seen rather than being Anna recounting what I knew.
That Sasha sent to you, the agent whom it led you to, who said it was the KGB who faked that Moscow theatre siege.
I think the Russian state would say that this opera is just a cultural manifestation of part of an information campaign by the UK state, but the West more broadly, to undermine Russia, to say that Russia was responsible for the poisoning, for the assassination of Litvinenko, a charge that Russian officials deny.
The point about sort of pushing the artistic boundaries is, again, it's the dance. It's a sort of strange sort of ritual. There's always been, this weird sort of dance and interaction between the state and creative people who are trying to comment or would challenge it. There was always a level of protest that was more or less tolerated in Moscow. Now we're in a different reality. It's a completely different story, because now protest is basically extremely tightly policed and very, very severely punished. Now all bets are off. No one knows what's going on. And I think we're going towards full-scale sort of Stalinist-style cultural control.
Russia, I believe, will rise again. To the motherland we shall return. Russia will rise again. To the motherland we shall return.
With the invasion of Ukraine, there has definitely been a tendency for people to look back and to start connecting dots that they hadn't connected before. The difficulty now is going to be, when we look back on Putin's now more than 20 years in office, and when we think about the invasion of Ukraine and the enormous suffering there, we have to be careful that we don't rewrite history and say that this was all obvious all the way along.